Sinasibigamu Baba matamu para mo
an alternate episode of Fanachu. While we host me in Untitled Chapter, you may have noticed this is a different episode, a different type of episode of Fanachu. I am traveling right now, and so I was not able to organize a live interview for today's episode. So I instead pre-recorded an interview. And I'm very, very happy to be able to share that with you for this week's episode. You may notice behind me there is a nice little protest sign, Mungadzuni Constitution. And so my guest for today is former member of the Guam Commission on Self-Determination, Marilyn Manibusan. And so Marilyn Mannabusin comes from, as you'll hear in this interview, she comes from an esteemed Chamorro legal family that has played a pivotal role in our island's history over the past 20th century into the 21st century. She was one of the first women to sort of be actively involved and be outspoken on the issue of decolonization. In 1979, she and others helped defeat the draft constitution by a huge margin. And we'll be talking about her reflections for that in this interview. We'll also be discussing her role on the Commission on Self-Determination, which was part of the negotiations for the Commonwealth status for Guam, which over 15 years, there was negotiations with the federal government over a possible change to Guam status, becoming a Commonwealth as opposed to an unincorporated territory. That movement ultimately failed, but we get a sense of what her experiences were like negotiating with the feds, engaging in public outreach and education here on island about status change. And then finally, she shares with us her message for future generations. Having been someone who sort of was speaking out in the community on these sorts of issues for decades, what wisdom, what ideas, what hope, or what caution does she have for future generations who are going to take up this issue, who are going to join the decolonization conversation? And now, Parapalgo, let's begin now this interview with former Senator Marilyn Manibusan.
Ako si Marilyn Manibusan. Toto tono to, Fanachu to gini, Chamorro to, then I'm just me. I'm very honored and proud to say that I'm the oldest of 4 children born to my dad, the late Judge Marilyn Manibusan Sr., and my mom, who is Alejandrina Atoigwe Manibusan. Hungan, it's true that I come from a lineal descendants of 3 judges. I'm not sure there's any American jurisdiction that has that to showcase. So my grandfather, Jose Camacho Manabusin, is the chief judge of the Island Court of Guam that later became the Superior Court. Then my father, Joaquin V. Manabusin Jr., was a judge, I'm a senior, and then my brother, Joaquin V. Manabusin Jr., who was a judge at the Superior Court of Guam and then became the judge magistrate of the District Court of Guam. So, Ungan, 3 generations of judgeship. Itatao Bill, my grandfather. The court was usually at the old Guam Congress building, that's their legislature now, and my grandfather would, when I remember what my grandfather would take me, and if he's presiding over a case, he will have me underneath the bench. Told me to listen, but don't say anything. My grandfather participated in the push for self-determination also, where he and B.J. Berdelli and a whole bunch of other people had actually petitioned Congress. I mean, he was in several of the trips to the United States Congress. He also, from what I understand in reading in the history book, that he was presented the flag, when the flag was first, the Guam flag was first sewn and formulated, that they presented him because he was the chief judge during that time. But as a human being, he was a genteel, honorably, Guaizadun, na tata, and uli si tatao na nenos and character traits. You know, he received that. So I missed him. I missed him very much. I believe a lot of the issues were land rights during that time, the registration of land, the title ownership of land. I remember a majority of the discussion sometimes was just the, title, people who are they value their inheritance. They value the land that was given to them. I remember during that time, I didn't know when my grandfather said, Guam, stop making land in Guam. Oh, God, stop making land in Guam. So even in my early days, the land was very precious. And I remember a lot of discussions from the Manamko when they would come to visit Papa. Or they would talk about tilling the soil, planting the corn, and how precious that land was, or planting even the tobacco during those days when they were harvesting tobacco. So I remember I would always go out there, and he will get the hole, and I would come with my corn, and pega cheso cinco na simidza, and that's why land during that time was just a very major discussion in the family. Well, first of all, it was an intense emotional issue. It was an issue that I thought was very dear to me, and that was in my learning experience, that we the people, I remember we had to memorize We the People. We had to memorize a whole bunch of the Gettysburg Address. We had to memorize, I pledge allegiance to the United States of America. We memorized a lot of things, and it was embedded in me that I had a voice. And during my collegiate days, a long time ago, during my days in San Francisco, where my dad got us a house and situated us there, and we went to school there, that it was, although it was a melting pot, and one can easily blend in, one with color can easily blend in, I always found myself having to explain where I came from. What is a Chamorro? Where is Guam? So during my days, my college days, I was always in a position to defend my being a Chamorro, to explain. I was an ambassador for Guam because I always had to talk about Guam. I always had to bring products from Guam to show them very well. And they will laugh when I say that I would also eat fanihi, or a whole bunch of other things that they would. And I was always representing Guam. Of course, this was personal because this was me and strangers, people who were not from Guam. And when I came back to the island, we were talking about Guam writing a constitution and talking about who gave us the authority to do certain things. It bothered me that I found myself having to say, wait a minute, what are we doing here? You know, and I found it compelling for me to express my opinion, and expressing an opinion started to become. I started verbalizing them, and then I started to be a mouthpiece for a lot of things, and so that's what started, was trying to call attention to people who may not understand the issue, the basic premise of standing up for your rights, standing up for who you are, and that reach and morals matter. We have an inalienable right to determine our destiny, what to do with ourselves, or what government, it was a gamut of issues. So it was a compelling issue for me to express my opinion, and that's how I became a mouthpiece. Well, I found myself, since I was absent for a while, I found myself to be comfortable, because although some of them may look familiar, some are family members, some of them are peers of my father in government. They were scholars and very admirable leaders of Guam. I found myself speaking to the same audience as if they were strangers. I mean, trying to express my opinion so that I had a comfort level. And I wanted to make sure that my points of view, that they would hear that, that I would open doors, open their minds, open their hearts, and they would listen to the conversation, to the discussion, that just because someone said, you can bake this cake, it may not be the right cake, and I will bake it at the time when I want to bake it, and I will make sure that it's not vanilla, and if chocolate was what I wanted. So I wanted to simplify the debate, I wanted to simplify the conversation, because a lot of people may not quite comprehend what an instrument called the Constitution was going to embrace, and what the ramification is of having to approve this Constitution that someone else said, like the cake, said, hey, you can do this. Well, thank you, but let me decide. So that was something that was the underlying premise that compelled me to go out and talk about the Constitution, talk about what are we doing, and why do we need to have somebody external tell us that, hey, it's okay, you can write a Constitution, hey, it's okay, you can write it, but this is how you're going to write it. This is what you're going to do about it. And so there were just several things that I believe that people didn't understand what that is. I believe Guam should have its own constitution. But I believe strongly that we, the governed, should frame the Constitution. We are the framers of that Constitution. And before we frame that document, that we should also address something so crucial and so critical that was not addressed in this federal legislation that gave us the authority, and that is I do not want to remain an unincorporated territory of the United States, because your federal legislation, Public Law 94-584, only tells me to write the Constitution, which maybe have me ratifying that I'm okay with the colonial status of an unincorporated territory. So the writing of the Constitution did not address the most critical issue, and that is, what is my relationship with the U.S.? Should I remain? Should I ratify this in the back door by approving the Constitution and say I'm okay being a colony, I'm okay being an unincorporated territory? And so that was not the case. So the ratification of Constitution would take all of that implied consenting, and I don't think it was thoroughly discussed that was very important. We Chamorros, we always get together. It doesn't matter where, whether it's a fandango, a funeral, baptismal, birthday party, or just a barbecue. And, this was the buzz during that time, because the delegates of the Constitutional Convention then were led by very scholarly, respected leaders, state leaders. They were statesmen and a couple of women during that time, and they were elected by the people to serve as delegates. They went into a real thorough, comprehensive work that came out. They drafted this Constitution, and so that was very important to me. I was very sensitive to who were the delegates, how much time, effort, sacrifice, and they put into drafting this Constitution, and the respect I have for each one of them and their opinions. It was very difficult for me to go out and to say, I don't believe we should adopt that work that you just did. And I was very sensitive to that. And it got me to thinking that how do I engage the community to understand the sensitivity that the opposing viewpoint is not necessarily opposing those who sat as delegates, their work product, but there are also other ramifications that needs to be discussed before we adopt. So we had to formulate discussions among people, and there were different people who decided to talk about the court system, the Republican form of government. Shall we have a Republican form of government? There was a discussion whether, why should we be just a unicameral? Why can't we be a bicameral? The Bill of Rights, the Supremacy Clause of the United States, should all of the U.S. Constitution apply to Guam? Are we going to have complete citizenship rights? Which none of the Constitution did. The Constitution did not give us full citizenship rights. And the Constitution did not change our colonial status. The Constitution was merely an improved organic act. And so these are three elements that we had to concentrate on. And that was that were very critical. And I believe that when people started to take it away from it being a personal issue and actually looked at the elements, so it was more, what's in the Constitution? What does it mean to us? What does it what does it say if we vote for it and if we don't vote for it? And I believe that we did an educational campaign because the group of us that decided to be vocal took this to every village. We went out to every village and we sat there for hours and hours. And this is the part where we had one objective, one goal. Babai Petta, open the door. The door is your heart. The door is your mind. Babai Ipetta. Ipetta ni para I título y para un comprende. Ipetta ni corazón. Para un hongi, un faniente, afu kumeklinasti. And para un baba a discussion, you know, to open the discussion so you could have an open view and not a closed one. So then you don't have a shut door right away. So we were focused on an educational campaign that says open the door. And if you have the questions, we will be more than happy to answer. So we have to be very succinct. We had to formulate arguments that could not be, it was an argument that you could not divide. That these were arguments that would not cause any division, and arguments that were succinct and that is irrevocable. Who would argue that we are not a colony? Who would argue that this Constitution is a federal legislation and just improved the Organic Act? Who would argue that this Constitution, okay, does not give us full rights of U.S. citizenship? And so we said, these are these arguments. And if we stayed on this, sempita convinci tato, mababay petta zo macomprendi. So animati ora ne, quanto sa 89%, 82% lignia mungasya. Sa tidinansin ay napata sangwani I federal, we're not going to be, the federal government isn't going to get the consent of the government by saying yes. So the defeat, to me, is a resounding voice of the people saying that we, the people, have not given you the consent of the governed that allow us to govern ourselves. And that has not been achieved till now. I mean, we still haven't done that. We remain an unincorporated territory, and we need to push that issue. I believe that we did. The Commission on Self-Determination managed to get the climate, the vote of the people that expressed a Commonwealth, and there are only three kinds of relationship, you know? Complete severance, which is independence, complete integration, which is statehood, and some form of an association, which is what Commonwealth was then. It was some form of association which said we want to have a closer relation, because there were two plebiscites. One didn't get a majority, and so we had a runoff, and Commonwealth was the status that the people voted. And of course, history says that the United States Congress did not particularly like the mutual consent clause. And that's where we are. We had, of course, it was a coalition of Para and Pada. There was one evening we all gathered over my mom and dad's house, and Dr. Robert Underwood said, I have an organization that exists as Para. And so I said, okay. He said, okay, so I believe I said, well, why don't I call my organization PADA? And they said, Hafakomekilemu PADA. I said, well, you know, we can use it as an acronym for something. I mean, it's so easy to say People's Alliance for Responsive Alternatives, which is what we said PARA was for those seeking an English interpretation of PADA. But the tomorrow, isinantin tomorrow, PADA means para un, you know, pernalag nangga, panun malalak di, no, ipada kalan. I think during that time in Mapadao na magkakisanangyo na dispasyo nangganaza sa kalanti siguro mo na slow down. So I said, nanggaza taagan mo pada. So kami ni grupon pada, Guaho si the late Tony Leon Guerrero, the former judge BJ Cruz, si Benetunca, Defunta, Rosan Palomo, and then there were all these other people that were with the PARA group, which is the Robert Underwood's group. But mine was, you know, Tony came in particularly based on the issue of sovereignty and autonomy. But kalan malilifa was that bibihaso todo do man mamapatigi na tiempo lo eno mas uli ki hami during that time dispenso and to hasui pamalo lo yeah. Oh, and see Chris Howard, no, Hajitalo during that time. See, remember, see Chris, he was very vocal also, and see Nananya, see Rita and from Chris, yeah, see Rita, yeah, okay. See ho ginabanda gi I para nesa the para group was the language group, the cultural group, the preservation of that, you know, with Dr. Underwood, no? And of course, Siho. And Tuli si ang hitki during that time, you know. Oh, and si Benaventi. Remember? Si Ed Benaventi. Yeah, Ed. Puro na siya man masupopotin you know, during that time. Si Bennett and si Hope and si NHS na pamahan, si Mrs. Palomo, si Auntie Rosa, why it goes that, okay. Man NHS, man de Machal, man Mandidog and Forti, the preservation of the Chamorro language, the culture, and the argument of the indigenous rights which surfaced during that time, the issue on who exercises the inalienable right to determine Guam's destiny, the self-determination issue. And it was Hope and that group of people that started to echo more, and that's why OPIR was established during that particular period in the Constitution debate. Because there was focus on and concentrating on not alienating the delegates and their work and the efforts they put in, we remained non-personal and we concentrated on the strategy. I believe that that was foremost. I believe that that was received by the delegates and those, because we always say dispensaham, and we always, because we looked at them as Manaina. So Saina dispensaham lo guapuntun mami. So we always say, excuses, but we have a difference of opinion, or we have certain things that we want to bring to your attention. And I believe that the focus of the discussion being that, do you really want to approve this Constitution to say that we remain a unincorporated territory? Because, there was this stipulation in the Enabling Act that the Constitution has to be done in the framework of a federal territorial relation, the existing federal territorial relation. It's plain English. So what is the existing federal territorial relation? Remaining an unincorporated territory. Whatever happened to the push for self-determination, the push for real, true self-government? So it defeats that whole premise of the people aspiring to improve its status or to change its status by having to approve this Constitution. And I believe that the delegates were beginning to see that that was a very critical question that they themselves could not answer, because they know that the Constitution did not address that. It did not change Guam's status. As a matter of fact, it actually said it has to remain. It already mandated that the Constitution has to remain within its current federal territorial relationship. And I wasn't about to say, do you want to say you want to remain a colony of the United States? And I believe that the majority of the delegates then said, I don't believe that's what we're saying. I said, yes, you are going to say that, because that's the message if you ratify this Constitution. So do you believe that the ratification of this Constitution would give you full-fledged citizenship? What would the answer be? The answer could not be yes. So that again was a challenge, because everybody was saying, we don't vote for the president, we don't have representation in Congress, so that's not full-fledged citizenship, correct? And so they were answering the questions themselves, and they found themselves having to believe that, I mean, if, 82% of the voters at that time in 1979 believe, I'm thinking that families and friends of the same delegates believed that we had a point. Guane Nasaina, no, I mean, it's typical. Sometimes you have parents who are vocal. There's sometimes parents who use means to correct their children when they think that correction is in place. And during this whole thing, there were delegates that were asking the question, why? Why are we very vocal against the Constitution? Why don't we take this opportunity? Receiving sa manmanait ni sinapatinadad, which is a typical Chamorro reception of being grateful. Receiving sa manmanait ni sinapatinadad, no? Lo hunggan tagadesi na mamanai ni sinapatinadad. We are grateful that an opportunity, that the fact that the United States Congress said, hey, I think it's time for Guam to write their Constitution. I mean, hallelujah, praise the Lord. But at the same time, ko patarisibis dini, ko mauli kasi tarisisibi, Kodinansi si Teresisibi? Are we receiving something that's good for generations to come, for the future of Guam? Are we receiving something that's beneficial at that point in time? Or what are we receiving that we need to be grateful about? And so, we answered those delegates that seemed to be find it repulsive that at the last minute there was this rambunctious group of young people, especially this woman here, having to come up and say, hey, nanga para esti parapada, right? So, yeah, but we managed to survive that outcry, remaining respectful and hoping that they would understand that it's just not that we didn't have anything better to do, or that somehow it was we were just rambunctious during that time, and so we succeeded. But there were several who found it to be a little bit repulsive. We were believing during the village to village educational campaign where we participated that you could analyze the sentiments of the people at the meeting, although it's not representative of the entire village, but the majority of the village people who attended the village meetings and sessions and the discussion, they were sympathetic, empathetic, and they were more saying, "Hungan magahin, hafasti kumiklik na they seem to be supporting our viewpoints at that point in time, because at these village meetings there were always delegates representing the Kan, and then we had the Parapada group on the side, and so there was always a real discussion. And during that time, I was saying that I was gauging those who were there who were more receptive to our arguments, although I wasn't too sure that it was going to come out with the resounding 82%. I felt that we were winning the sentiments of the people, but 82% was a great victory. And I believe that we were all yelling and screaming and all, and we were just very thankful that we achieved our goal. I mean, that it was something that the history was going to record this. Well, I never really, I never had an aspiration to become an elected leader, to be elected. And so I guess by my being vocal and an activist and expressing my opinion, people just said, hey, you should run for senator, because I was just an activist. I was just a political activist. I was just a mouthpiece, expressing my opinion. And so I decided to put my name into, but I lost my first bid. It was during districting. And in my district, I was running as a Republican, and my district was very Democrat, and there was a vacancy that was left behind by Senator Catherine Uggan, who had stepped down. And my whole family is Democrat. And how I became to run as a Republican was the old folks during that time, and I was the young, the young activist. I had people like Ala Morena, Pete Paris, the younger statesmen of Jerry Rivera, Joada, Frank Bloss. And they kept saying, hey, you belong over here, we're the young ones, And so I decided I was going to join the Republican Party, and I ran. I got defeated in my first bid, and on my second bid I made it in because it was election at large. They did away with the districting. So I didn't know how I did not get districting and a smaller amount of voters, and then at large I managed to succeed. So I sat on the Commission on Self-Determination because I made sure that the minority representative was me, and I said that's what I want, and I sat on the Commission on Self-Determination, survived several governors, several administrations, and remained in the commission for a long, long, long time. And here, the Me Too, right? There's so many, I believe I was talking to you earlier about Me Too. There's all these people who come and join the banner of wherever you are, whether you're for statehood, independence, free association, Commonwealth, status quo, whatever. So people were in this discussion. But it is the art of engagement. And when you see that your leaders are engaged, and they are engaged in the discussion, and they formulate a plan to execute on this plan, that they saw fit. I mean, we had a vote. We had an educational campaign. We said to the people, if you don't know what we're talking about, this is what we are. We are on the United Nations list as a colony, and we didn't place ourselves there. We were placed there. We remain as a colony. We are called an unincorporated territory versus an incorporated territory because there is that other status that says incorporate, but we are so we had to explain that. It was taking the time to educate the people, whether you are an eligible voter. It was everybody, encompassing every person that lived in Guam had to know what we were talking about. Why are we pushing it? Why are we engaged in this discussion? Why are the leaders focused in this discussion? Because it is important to know who you are, where we come from, who's directing traffic here, and whether we should allow traffic to be controlled elsewhere, or do we control ourselves? And who gets the right to control? Who gets the right to discuss and to determine the form of government we want? I mean, if we want the Republican form of government, we say so. The consent of the government has to say, yes, that's what we want. So the reason why I believe that it was successful during that time is that there was a lot of focused attention to an educational campaign. And we went out by not only through the media, but to the schools, to the villages, and did this educational campaign. And I believe that it was a very vibrant and undaunting effort by the Commission on Self-Determination. And it survived because we got a vote. We just didn't say, here's the parameters and how to do it. We actually said, let's execute it. So you don't have just a plan and the schematic design of how that plan looks like and formulating the plan, but we executed on the plan. We got a vote. Sinente. Okay, sinenti in Chamorro is your heartfelt sentiment, no? So, again, that we can discuss anything, you know, on the table. Afamala gomo pongkano pa ako na pringi, ko, you know, malago pot chop, pot steak, but a manok, right? I mean, so that's a typical conversation. Lo, you know, titaibi sinenti. So the sentiment of the leaders then, they were involved. They felt this was crucial and important. It was an issue that was paramount in their political, if they had any political aspiration, it was an issue that was paramount over anything else. It was an issue provocative and profound enough that it led them to plan it, to focus on it, to execute on that plan. So where are we now? Well, there's so many other issues, right? I mean, people can blame it on the economy, the inflation, COVID. We could, I mean, you know, you could always find an excuse to minimize the discussion on self-determination. There's always something going on that someone always uses as a reason. I mean, some may use it as a reason, some may use it more likely as excuses. But during that time, our time, taza excuse, taza razón, okay? So, but there's room for a lot of excuses. There's room for reasons to come up and say, kalanti importantes din discussion, no? Lo ano kami? Testigo, testamentary, evidence, okay? There was evidence that the sentiment was there, the focus was there, and the execution was there. So, tayo sinenti. The problema kita Guam, magufo, I'm very honored and privileged that my colleagues in the commission gave me equal standing and respected my viewpoints. Because here's I will not bring into the discussion points that are not valuable for other people to receive and to be informed. So it's always information. How do you impart the information? And is the information important? And how do you translate it where someone else receives it to be equally important? And so I know that when they yield to me, they always know that what I would say was something that would contribute to the debate or the discussion. So I'm very grateful up to now that I never had any of those issues. Yeah. Well, you know, I was in a supportive role because the chairman of the commission, which is Governor Joseph Haddad then, would always be the spokesperson leading the discussion. So in a supportive role, I always felt that it was overbearing. I mean, you know, you come in and you know that it's going to be an uphill battle. First of all, we're letting them know that we just defeated the Constitution, the enabling legislation that says you can write a Constitution, and then we come in with this notion that we want to have a mutual consent, and you cannot just unilaterally and arbitrarily decide for us. And so, of course, that's a no-no. And so every time I come, I'm always, you know, during that time, I always have my rosary bead, and so I'm saying, because It was a battle. We knew it was a battle, but we were so consumed with the energy that we were there representing the best for Guam. Iminaulik para itauto iisla dyan itauto tano inigi finet mismo. So when you're equipped with that, you know, you're ready to battle. You're ready. And I am sure that, you know, the Pacific Islanders, the Chamorro people coming in there, battling with these superpowers, right? Yeah, it's very, very overwhelming. But timan maha niyawam. We were not scared. We didn't come in with a defeatist attitude. We come in with a victorious attitude because all we had to bring with us was the will of the people, the consent of the government. And what we are representing is for the future generations. It's not going to, it was something that we may not be even recipients of the benefits, but we were there because manmagufan para bibinfan, you know, para tayin chekasti. We were just honored that we would be the initiators. So, ngat man maanewam lo, ay timandangiyam, we were, you know, afadangi gifu na English.
Cowardly?
Coward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, timandangiyam, we were not cowards. How can you say we were cowards when we were right there face to them, man? Well, like I said, my membership in the Commission on Self-Determination expired when I lost the election. So I no longer was part of the commission, and I did not get appointed by any of the governors then, although I, you know, participated in a lot of the organizing. But continuity. Follow up, 2 words, right? Follow up, continuity, and and if you're pursuing, you know, a woman, a man pursuing a woman, there's continuity. You want to continue to preserve the relationship, the contact. There's always room for improvements, and there's progress reports and all that. And to me, when this whole Commonwealth issue, when it died in Congress, I was expecting an alternative plan of action. The alternative plan of action, there's a discussion. What shall we do with Commonwealth? How do we engage in, you know, the plebiscite, the Chamorro only vote? There was some suggestion that we should just ignore the Commonwealth and come up with another vote, and we should have only 3, statehood, free association, and independence. Well, did that discussion ever come out on a formal plan? No. Was there any design? No. Was there any execution? No. So the question is, who should initiate it? Where are the leaders? Will the real true leader please stand up? You know, there's that famous TV show, will the real true leader please stand up? So, you know, there's ample discussion, and Guam is Mazuti making a palabras bula opinion. There's so many opinions, and you are entitled to your opinions, but there's no plan. There's no plan to allow people with these opinions to verbalize them, to educate, to go out, educate the public, and execute. So allow the people to hear your opinion and let them, but there's no execution. Taza plano. So, you know, Haji Putinegui. I mean, should another Parapada group surface? Should there be another group outside the political arena that is necessary to bring this up again? I don't know, maybe. But you rely that this is a continuation. Because it didn't end. People expect. Because you just don't vote for a status and say, okay, take it and put it in file 13, okay? They're expecting people who are in office who are now, you know, have the authority to make laws, change laws, enact laws, fund them, and move forward. But Taza. So the question is, who's going to do it? If you're looking to your leaders and it's not coming there from there, then that's why you have all these other organizations who are vocal organizations who seem to be effective because they're fragmented, because these organizations are to preserve this, to protect this, to do this. It is not encompassing. And so we are bifurcating the issue, which we don't need to bifurcate. We need to put them all together into one voice, and that one voice should be I mean, what is our status? What are we doing now? Where are we going? So that discussion hasn't been raised. It's not paramount. It doesn't seem to be a profound issue, and that's sad. The message is, are you talking to your people? Are you engaging your people? Do you know what your people are saying? Do you know what the fraction of our community are saying? Where do most of your people stand? How do they feel? What are their opinions? You don't take the message elsewhere because they don't matter. It's a good forum because you raise the issue. But the message should be directed to the people. Take the message to the people. Engage your people. And manhongiyo, bisnusita no na fanhongi. So if you're taking the message elsewhere, afadzu na message na mas importante na yoto tao to fanungo. Mas importante na este estrangeiro ni tato Iowa por mano po fanungo genda noi or mano se mas po faman ekungo. Tisiya maman bobota. Ti tao ta. So anong tutuloy message ne za una susuwa ti tao mo after mano na para na panolo malaza tafanita mo na ni Are you looking for me? Are you searching for me? Do you really want to know how I feel? Do you really know my opinion about this? You can change it. Because we definitely did in the defeat of the Constitution. Because if we didn't do anything, Parapada didn't do anything, that Constitution would have gone. The message had to be loud and clear, honesto, honest, transparent, and it has to be real and true. Isinenti. That message has to be verbalized, vocalized, and touch. You have to touch people. You have to communicate. So the message, take the message to the people.